A new dawn has broken, has it not?
She was the people's princess.
I feel the hand of history upon our shoulder.
We are not going to win despite our beliefs. We will only win because of our beliefs.
Tony Blair. Before the Iraq War stained his reputation, he was British politics' golden man. He took the Labour Party from being a toxic brand to being the embodiment of its optimistic future. He didn't just win over people, he charmed people.
I really do believe in Tony Blair. I think he's a great man. I don't claim to know lots about politics. I actually think the average person doesn't either.
So how did he do it? This video will show you the techniques behind his charisma, behind Blair's mesmerising likeability, and how he lost that shine so completely that today, I'm actually baffled by how popular he once was. And again, all I ask is that if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Now before we start, it's amazing, this channel has reached not just 1,000 subscribers, but nearly 3,000 subscribers. And that means I'll be doing a Q&A video, so if you put some questions in the comments, then there's a chance that we'll make it into that video. So first we're going to look at one of Blair's 1996 conference speeches from the time when he was still trying to get his first election win.
Look at them! The tax-cutting party that gave us the biggest tax rises in peacetime history. And I say this too to John Major. If he wants to be seen as an honest man, fight an honest campaign.
These are all examples where Blair is using a balanced sentence structure. These are sentences made up of two parts of equal weight and importance, but you might notice that there's a bit more to how Blair uses balance. Let's just focus on one of these. Let's highlight those balanced parts of the sentence. Seen as an honest man, fight an honest campaign. Each clause has a parallel element and a contrasting element. If we zoom out, you can see this goes for all of the sentences. This is a deliberate technique. Now, if you've been following the channel, you might recognize some of these devices, but they don't quite fit. You could call this antithesis, but it's not quite that. It's not using opposites. You could call it parallelism, but it's more than that. Each sentence is setting up contrasts as well. But what Blair is doing is using this in combination with each other within his sentences to achieve a certain effect. Now, what does he get out of doing that? First, to expose his opponent's contradictions. He can create a devastating sense of irony using this.
He doesn't, and his deputy leader does one day and doesn't the next. These are party matters. Will he tell us what his position is?
Oh no, there's one very big difference. I lead my party, he follows his.
Second, to clarify his arguments. Tony Blair is always saying, I'm not trying to do that, I'm trying to do this. You can have X, and it doesn't have to come with Y.
This country is very proud of the National Health Service. What it is not proud of is what this government has done to the National Health Service.
You can't legislate for good community or family values, and it's not governments that bring up children, it's families that raise children.
By speaking in this way, he anticipates objections to his ideas and makes his stances easier for people to understand. Using these balanced sentence structures lent itself to the centrist ideas Blair was arguing for, that people could have all of the positives of social justice without any of the downsides. If you watch to the very end, I'll have more to say on Blair's politics later. But the third advantage of these balanced sentences was that it was one way that Blair created the rhetorical effect that he is most famous for. And what's that? See if you can guess from these clips.
Ask me my three main priorities for government, and I tell you, education, education, and education.
They regarded her as one of the people. She was the people's princess.
A day like today, I mean, it's not a day for sort of sound bites, really. But I feel the hand of history upon our shoulder.
These are all examples of sound bites. and in the 24/7 news cycle, Blair's success depended on them. A soundbite is a short sentence or phrase that is easy to remember, often included in a speech made by a politician and repeated in newspapers and on television and the radio. As well as balanced sentences, Tony Blair and his team wrote slogans, mantras, and cliches for newspapers to quote. This ability to say a point concisely and poetically whilst seeming unprepared is what contributed to his popularity. It made him seem relatable and human. So now that we've looked at balanced sentences, how else did Tony Blair charm Britain? Another device that saved the same function for Blair was humour, and he has a go-to method for making people laugh.
Some of you I hear support me simply because you think I can win. Actually, that's not a bad reason for supporting me. I just like to know.
The Law and Order Party that doubled crime and gave us a Home Secretary in court more often than the people he's supposed to be locking up.
These are all jokes that rely on irony, and it's a cornerstone of British humour. Irony is a rhetorical device that relies on highlighting the discrepancy between reality and what was intended or expected. Now, if you're watching this from America, Brits famously think that Americans don't really get irony, but if you do, you can let me know in the comments. Blair's charm really came through in his smile and quick quips. These small, disarming moments made people like him.
There we go. It's about time the MPs did some work, isn't it, really?
It seems a bit odd to me, but it's very effective. Now we've looked at the techniques, now let's look at the content of Blair's rhetoric. And to set the scene, we have to remember that in the 1990s, British politics was dominated, stuck even, in a tired ideological battle between public and private interests, between workers and corporations, between free markets and socialists. This framing suited the ruling Conservative Party, and Labour, no matter what they did, kept losing. Blair's party were associated with a stale past. Their leaders had been old, ideological, and entirely committed to state power. If Blair was going to win, what ideas could he use to detoxify his brand? Now, Blair decided to go with two main themes. Can you guess what they were?
Secondly, the finance can be public and private. There are no boundaries of ideology here. Forget the past. No more bosses versus workers. We are on the same side, the same team, and Britain United will win.
The two ideas he kept coming back to in those clips were novelty and harmony. Where Britain had been stuck between capitalism and socialism, he would offer a third way. It was fresh and it was unifying. What was important to people was not so much exactly what he would do, but whether he was the right person to move beyond the stuck arguments of the past. As I mentioned before, Blair chose techniques to make an appeal to centrism. A cynic might say he promised clashing groups that they could both get what they wanted. His followers, though, might say he took the positives from his Conservative opponents and his core vote and made them into something new. But no matter what your perspective, it worked, as Tony Blair won the next 3 elections, more than any previous Labour Prime Minister in history. Now, Blair's public speaking is only one factor in this, but to me it's fascinating how people's positive image of Blair was really managed by the simple use of some techniques. What amazes me even more, though, is how he failed to use these when his popularity started to plummet. The crime of defensiveness. Our last example shows that if popularity was crafted using simple techniques, then failing to use them when it matters will make you lose support very quickly. Here's an interview ahead of the 2005 election. What do you think now of how Blair's performance compares?
Let's look at Iraq. When you told Parliament that the intelligence was extensive, detailed and authoritative, that wasn't true, was it?
No, it was true. There was no doubt about...
It wasn't extensive, it wasn't detailed, and it wasn't authoritative.
I'm sorry, it was, and...
No, don't you, that just 2 weeks before you made that statement, the Joint Intelligence Committee said that intelligence remains limited.
Of course, intelligence always is limited, but
well,
they also
therefore
made...
it's not extensive, detailed and authoritative, is it?
I'm sorry, their judgment was absolutely clear.
So was the JIC, the Joint Intelligence Committee report, wrong?
No, they weren't wrong in what they reported at the time. They were absolutely right. But later it transpired that some, not all, of that intelligence was wrong. But the decision I had to take at the time was whether, as a result of that intelligence, we could conclude Saddam was in breach of United Nations resolutions, and I concluded he was, and I may say the evidence is that he indeed was in breach of UN resolutions.
I'll tell you what I noticed. Gone is the humour, gone are the balanced sentences. Instead of charm and empathy, we are seeing defensiveness. Defensiveness is never a good look in public speaking. Now, we'll never know how much single performances impacted the vote, but what we do know is that Labour's majority reduced in that election to 66 over concerns about Blair's trustworthiness and the Iraq War. I'm no fan of the Iraq War, but just from a public speaking point of view, Blair had other options here. He could have used a strategic concession, accepting that the intelligence was flawed, while still arguing that he made the best decision at the time. 2. He could have shown remorse and duty. For example, if he'd committed to repair the damage in Iraq, whilst maintaining the image of a prime minister that tried to protect its people when he thought that they were threatened. And 3, he could have shown more empathy and willingness to make better decisions rather than reacting with disagreement. Generally, any of those techniques would have been far better than defensiveness, because it would have been accepting the principle behind the criticism and adapting it into his position without conceding any ground. Now, obviously, I'm not defending the war in Iraq, but I would argue that Blair's reputation was still salvageable at this point. Had he not been so reluctant to admit he'd made a mistake, he could have saved face in this situation. And to this day, I'm still confused about how somebody who was supposedly so charismatic, so practiced, could make such a rookie error. And speaking of errors, if you don't want to let this video go unsupported, then don't forget to like and subscribe. You've made it this far, so why not show your appreciation? So, what does this all mean? It makes the story of Blair an enigmatic tale of two halves. Studying him should teach us how easily popularity can be gained by managing public appearances, and how public speaking techniques feed into audience perceptions of us. Today, Blair often implies he was the victim of a timeless paradox, that all leaders start at their most popular and least capable, and end at their most capable and least popular. But I'm not sure I agree. Had Blair not gone down the path of war, had he not committed the public speaking sin of defensiveness, had he retained his focus on winning people over with charm, novelty and harmony, as he'd worked painstakingly for many years to do, then he might well have remained the most popular Prime Minister Britain has ever had. Blair, once the people's Prime Minister, now more resembles the fallen charmer. It is a cautionary tale for any who dare to speak in the public sphere. And if you like this video, then you will definitely like this one about Obama's oratory. And if you want to learn how to think on your feet in a debate without getting defensive, click this one instead. I'll see you in the next video.